All righty. Welcome, Sifu.
Welcome. Yeah, good. Thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Hey, this is taking a while to get this together, but we are here. The stars have aligned. Um, is there any clips going on right now, or some type of? Did we just have a super moon? I think it was.
I think it was a little while ago.
Yeah. Okay. So how we want to start here today, Sifu? We want to honor the traditions of Juklum Gitong Pai, and we want to share with people the history. Um, I know it's a lot of history and it's a lot to go through. So we may have to do it, like you mentioned, maybe in a few different sessions to get it all out and to get it all done. Um, but what I want to do is allow you to first introduce yourself and just let people know who you are, um, especially in relationship to the system and you know, just give us a little bit of background because then we're going to go a little more detailed into stuff.
Okay, well, I'm Master Jeff Larson. I'm an Enter the Gate disciple of Grand Master Henry Puyi and a certified Black Sash in Qigong and Kung Fu. I've been training this year for training and teaching for 45 years, and I'm 65 now, so started at 20. And I think today what we'll cover is more of the recent history, and then we can go back into the further history, the origin of the system, um, perhaps with the next appointment. So I think if we're going to talk about recent history, we have to go back to Atlanta in 1988 and talk about Grandmaster Yi's first school there. So I was actually teaching in a school a mile from where Sifu Yi was teaching. Um, and I was teaching underneath Jinfu Mark's name. I'd been in Atlanta for a couple of years. And when I went down there, they told me, they didn't offer me or suggest, they told me I would be teaching. So I started by offering workshops. And next thing you know, I was teaching. I had a room in a boxing gym and I had about 10 or 12 students, including some private students. And one day a private student came in with a flyer for a Southern Praying Mantis classes that were being offered in the area. I found that really strange because I didn't know about Sifu's lineage.
Mm.
So I thought, well, let me go over and meet this guy who's teaching Southern Praying Mantis. And of course, I thought, well, I'm all that in a bag of chips. So I'm gonna go let him know who I am,
Yeah, that's
right? So I got there and I met Sifu Yi, and it took me about 5 minutes to realize that I was in so far over my head that I just needed to eat some humble pie and see what I could learn.
yeah.
Well, in about he asked me to show him three-step arrow. So I showed him three-step arrow, and he said, 100% Jin Food Mark, followed by you've got no foundation, right? So I thought, well, okay. He said, follow me. Went into the next room, a big room, and he said, watch this. And he did a circle and stomped into the ground, shooting energy in, grabbed, started doing this grab of this energy, pulling it up, and started shooting 1, 2, 3, and then chop step 1, 2, 3. And I thought, I've never seen anything like that in my life. So from that point on, I was Sifu's student, and I brought my students over. I closed my school and brought my students over to him in the fall of 1988.
Wow.
So that's how it began, and he was kind enough to make me his assistant instructor at that time.
Wow.
So
Okay. Well, I've heard pieces of that story, and that really kind of filled in some of the gaps. And I didn't even know there were gaps, but that was pretty interesting.
yeah, that was definitely a humble pie moment for me. It's like, yeah, don't go around thinking you're all that because you don't know who's who out there in the world, right?
That's right. That is very true. Yeah, I learned that early. I
Yeah.
remember I was probably 11, 12, maybe, and I was studying Hapkido at the time. I had been studying since I was about 9, and I was pretty full of myself. And one day I was oh, somebody was testing. I think they were testing for like a blue belt or something like that. And in Hapkido, there's a lot of throws, a lot of that type of stuff. And there's a throw where both arms are tied up. So there's no way to break fall. Right.
Okay.
So as an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and even though I was watching a test, it was the funniest thing to me, the way the guy hit the ground, because I know how that feels to hit the ground and not be able to break that fall, how all of your organs shake, and I just busted out laughing. And my teacher at the time basically he said, "Oh, you thought that was funny, huh?" Calls me up and proceeds to let him finish his testing on me via all types of crazy throws and a lot of that same throw so that I could feel it and know what that was. And yeah, like I've probably been the most serious student ever since. Anytime I'm in, it's like I'm very focused. Um, so yeah, humble pie is very important, I believe.
Yep, those moments are definitely wake up moments for us.
Definitely. So what were Master Yi's focus in their early years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Gabriel. So, when Sifu opened his Atlanta school, he came up from Florida, where he'd been for about a year and a half down at Fort Pierce. That year and a half he was using as a recovery period from having been in a serious car accident in New York City, right? In which he was told that his hand, which was locked like a claw, and his, I forget which leg it was, but beneath the knee, I believe it was his left leg, would have to be, well, his leg would be amputated. That's what the doctors determined after a couple of months of therapy. And his hand that was in a claw was never going to get better. So Sifu actually checked himself out of the hospital, took $40,000 and set his family up with the finances they need while he was gone. And he went to Taiwan to meet his teacher, who used to live in Chinatown, um, and but who had moved, you know, Lam Song Si, his teacher. So he went to meet with him, and he tells when Sifu tells the story, he knocked on his teacher's door, and his teacher opened and just started crying, because to see the shape that he was in. So Sifu proceeded to train with him. The next day, Sifu says they went to the market, and in the preceding or in the following days and weeks, they went into the country and into the hills, and they picked herbs, and they made broths and ditachaos, and Sifu began to do his training. Now, there was something that helped to bring his leg back, and something that he soaked his hand in, which was to Chow. And the exercise that he did to bring back his leg was a movement called the Tai Chi ruler, right? But they called it the Tai Chi ruler, but it was really Tensing Qigong. And it was the up and down motion of the Tensing Qigong, and later the ability to send that energy in as deep as the bone marrow, right? That helped to bring his leg back. So when he got to Atlanta, following that time in Taiwan, following the time in Fort Pierce to recover, Sifu's focus was very Qigong. Well, it was very much Qigong. Okay. So when I met him, that was the focus that I got from 1988 until he left for Houston in 1991. In 1991, it shifted to Kung Fu. So the group in Houston that I would say didn't really understand what Sifu was training because he changed it, right? But our focus for everybody in Atlanta and for myself as the assistant instructor, and then later taking over the school, our focus was very much Qigong. Kung Fu was a part of it, certainly. We studied a lot of Kung Fu. Kung Fu may have even been physically more of the activity, but the mental focus and the spiritual focus was definitely Qigong.
Was there any relationship to that? I noticed you said that they were calling it the Tai Chi ruler.
Yeah.
Is there any like physical connection between the two um, movements? I know Tai Chi ruler is like it can be looked at like a weapon or even like a form and even like a measurement, from my understanding.
Yeah, I would qualify it more as a measurement.
Okay.
And I would say that because when you go to come up, there is no tension in the body, but the elbows will go to 90 degrees and the legs will be straight, but there's no tension. Then the shoulders will lift and then the elbows have to come back and it has to remain at 90 degrees. So there's very precise angles and movements and degrees of measure in that. And when Sifu called it the Tai Chi ruler, I would say that that probably comes from a reference he would have gotten from his teacher's teacher, who was a Taoist monk, a Taoist adept, who came from Wudong Mountain and brought that with him and incorporated the movements of Southern Praying Mantis, Kwang Sai Juklum Ji, Tong Long Pai, Kung Fu with the Qigong that he brought from Wudong Mountain.
Okay.
So that actually means that we as a system have possibly one of the only Qigongs that's a combination, a true combination of Wudong Mountain and Shaolin Kung Fu.
Okay.
Because as you know, his teacher's teacher became the master of the Shaolin Kung Fu, Kwang Sai Juklum Ji Tong Long Pai. So out of which CKFA emerged.
Okay. That's powerful. I've actually witnessed it a little bit, so I can speak briefly to it. In the last roughly 6 years or so, I've dipped my toe into the water of Bagua and Tai Chi. Um,
Okay.
I dabbled in Tai Chi years ago and Bagua with Alan Pittman, but in the last six
Come on
years,
in, Chris.
the um, the Bagua from Sifu Ben Bay, I noticed some of his qigong had some of the same elements, and he definitely says that
Come in
his
here.
is Taoist. So that really it just struck me. Even some of the opening and closing, walking walking the circles at the end of the qigong, rubbing the belly in a clockwise and then counterclockwise fashion. I've also noticed this in the Wudang Tai Chi. Now, I never saw this training with Alan Pittman 20 years ago in the park, or 23 years, 24 years ago in the park. But the Wudang Tai Chi is very, very different to me. It feels different. The energy is different. And I see so much Juk Lum in a lot, some of the movements, but more of their qigong that they have around their tai chi. I mean, some of the stuff I'm sitting, they even have the swallowing
Oh, really? Okay.
the bell, and the guy I've been studying with, he didn't have the full understanding of that fully. He just knew as to swallow it and let it drop into the cauldron and let it ripple, and that's basically what he had for it, and that was really it. But you know, I take very keen notice to things like that, based on studying with you and your teachings. I hear what you're saying, and then when I see it, especially when it's directly tied into what you said, it's like, oh, this is okay, But yeah, so let's continue. Um, so I know we were already talking about the early years. Can you go a little bit more deeper into Sifu Yi's Ting Sing Qigong? Just tell us a little bit more about it, maybe some of the functions, uh, what some of the energies. I found that this is one thing that I picked up on early was that all of the aspects that I saw from like a system from Montauk Chia, uh, I noticed that all of the, you might have to go through 30 different books of his to get the fusion of the five elements, the bone marrow washing, the iron bell. so forth and so on. And there's like all of these different things. And, I study Chinese medicine and acupuncture, so I'm aware of those things. Those things existed in the literature, earlier when I'm reading about it. Um, and they're basically telling you go study Qigong to get the details on that. And so when I was young, I was reading those books, and but when I found Juk Lum and the Southern Praying Mantis and the Ting Sing, I noticed that all of those aspects, all of those different forms that are breaking up, were all in one system encased. So can you
Yep.
speak to that?
And not only that, Gabriel, but we explain the different points in the Qigong. Like when they say you had to read 5 books, literally when someone goes through like a level 1 training for us, which can be a couple of months time, I tell them not only before they start, but as they're training, that they're going to know as much as most Qigong teachers by the time they finish their basic level 1 training, right? So we introduce some ideas like that. Now you're not going to be training up to that level oftentimes, like the bone marrow washing, but you're going to get an explanation of how each one connects to the other, the order in which they do it, the way that they do it, how the energy does it, the scenery of the Qigong in very, very simple ways, because it's always been my contention that when you know something well, you have the ability to explain it simply. And all you have to do is talk with somebody who's a philosopher to know what that means on the other end. Like they'll talk for hours and you go, what the heck were you saying? But when Tensing talks, you know exactly what we're talking about. We make it very simple. We make it accessible to everybody, and literally from day one, the movements that you're using day one will be the foundation for the highest level you'll ever get to. For eating chi, for shooting chi, for anything. So all those things are encapsulated. Everything you learn in day one, the early movements, um, and it's a case where you almost have to train it to get it. That there's just you're just surprised at, like, that there's that much explanation that early on, and that it's clear, right? So you don't have to go searching for it. We have a book. We may have others coming, but those were really more for the history of the system. But if you want to train with it, you could get with a qualified teacher, and you're going to be, I'd say, literally blown away every week by what you're getting from a Tensing teacher.
Um, so can you tell me exactly what uh Huang Sai Juk Lum Ting Xin Chi Kung actually means?
Yeah, Guangxi is the province in China, right? Um, the so when we say Guangxi Zhuklum Ji, you know, the Zhuklum is the system. Tong Long Pai is Southern Praying Mantis, right? And so it was a bamboo temple in southern China that the Taoist adapt and the second master of the system left Wudong to go to, because he had heard about this system and wanted to learn it. Well, he learned it so well, he became the master of the system. So, um, now I have to kind of explain what it means, why we say CKFA, right? When I earlier said when CKFA came about. Well, when Sifu left Atlanta and got to Houston, he was still saying the words Kwangsai Juklum Ji Tong Long Pai, the formal name of the system. Okay. But there was a group in New York that his teacher had left behind who were using that name also, right?
Okay.
And they contacted him and asked for a meeting, and he went and met with them. And Sifu proposed to them that he call his system, although still be able to reference his history, that he called his system Chinese Kung Fu Academy USA, and that they would keep the Kwangsai Juklum Ji name. He didn't have to do that, but he did, right? So that name still exists, but it's only for that one school in New York, Chinatown,
Got it.
of the followers, some of the original followers of his teacher,
Got it.
right? And if you go to New York, Chinatown and try to find it, good luck. I
Yeah,
don't think you're going to be able to find it. You're going to have to know somebody who knows somebody, because
I've seen some of the
it's like
videos.
going to China trying to learn the medicine for this system. It's very, very guarded,
Got it. Yeah,
right?
I've seen some videos from that school on YouTube, like when they are performing during Chinese New Year. Seen them doing some forms and doing some stuff. So the Sifu there, I think he's still the Sifu, probably. He's been interviewed a few times. Uh,
Yeah.
kind of familiar with him.
And this system, more than any other that I've trained, Gabriel,
Mhm.
requires explanation. So you can see it 1,000 times, and you can follow the movements, but unless it's been explained to you, you're never going to get it,
That's right. That's
right?
right. Yeah, man, I have questions about stuff that I've already questioned because each detail has more detail, and it's like
That's true, right?
it
Because
never.
when you said earlier the swallowing, you referenced that there are stages to the swallowing and levels to it, and um, ways to practice it, ways to feel for it that have to be described to you in order to get it. There's at least 3 stages to swallowing. So someone just says, I'm rolling my tongue and I'm swallowing. Well, that's not really all that it is. It's more than that. Have you found the thunder in the cave, right? Have you gotten this sensation? Do you know the tail of the fish? These are all things that are part of a swallowing. And unless a teacher gives that to you, and you're not going to get it unless you're trained for a fairly long period of time, you don't really know. I mean, you can benefit from swallowing, but um, I think at some point when I give you a little bit more of an explanation, it's something you can go back to this person with and go, okay, let me explain swallowing now, right? So
Definitely.
in more detail.
Okay. So real quick, what was your role as Sifu Yi's assistant in Atlanta?
I did basically all of the teaching. Sifu basically showed me before a class or on the weekend before I would teach what to teach, how to teach it, and I would practice it, and then I would teach it, and he would correct me, usually at dinner time, never around the students. Say, well, here, when you did this, change this. When you did this, change this, and we did that for 2.5 years. So he taught me before I taught, because what I had was something that I could partially apply, but his movements and energy and forms, I didn't have any of that. So he had to teach it all to me. So it was a case of sometimes I'm learning it a couple of days before the students are learning it. But because of the kung fu that I had when I learned it, I understood it, right?
So can you speak to that, the forms part? Like,
Well, yeah, I could find the energy in it. His forms were had different footwork. They had circular footwork, and they had short footwork and long footwork, long stepping. And those foundations were used for different forms. And the forms. It's important to understand. A form is just a way of training a technique, right? So forms are just a series of techniques. So, because if you go all the way back to when the Sifu trained in New York, Chinatown, there were no forms, right? So Sifu helped, along with what he calls his uncles, created the forms that he used to teach the Southern praying mantis, right? They were not how he learned.
and that's kind of really what I was asking because from what I understand, like in your original school with Jin Fu Mark, they didn't have those same forms.
Although they were different forms entirely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that being said, also, so does that mean that the other Southern Pragmatist schools around the world, other than the branch of Henry Puyi, do not have these additional forms? They may have the techniques, but they're taught differently. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. They'd have techniques, but they would have different ways of getting there. You know, you know the term because I use it often, 100 roads to Rome. There are many ways to get to a destination, right? And in Jinfun Mark's case, his forms are very different. his forms and some of the exercises for this might be similar, but the forms are very different. And yeah, the types of energy we would train, the types of devices we use to train, from Jin Fun Mark School to Grandmaster Yi School, completely different.
A lot of tiger, rabbit. I've heard that
Yep,
before.
there was tiger, there was rabbit, there was a combination. There was snake, there was leopard, there was southern praying mantis. So, so Jinfu Mark actually combined a few other forms into his southern praying mantis,
Okay.
right? So we clearly were where we were doing snake, we were doing crane. Yeah, we were definitely doing tiger because we would train to tear ears off and stuff like that. Um, so, but some forms, I like breaking things, were somewhat similar, you know.
That's interesting. Yeah, I still find it very interesting watching Southern praying mantis from different places and how it's expressed. And I think I mentioned this to you one time before, and I remember what you said, and it's like I said, what are they doing with their footwork? And you were like, oh, their kung fu is broken because I noticed like it's not there's not an integration between the top half of the body and the lower half. It doesn't feel like how when we train, it's like a certain energy that happens. And when I'm watching these guys, there's like a brokenness between what's going on down below and what's happening up top. The as above, so below thing. It doesn't seem. Um, I'm not sure what it is they're missing, but um, can you
Yeah,
speak?
my reference, I think, Gabriel, would have been less about Jin Fu and Mark's people. It's a different way of training.
Yeah, and not even
Um,
Jin Kung. I'm speaking more like what do you call it? Chugar,
other kung fu systems,
Iron
right?
Ox, that stuff. Hmm.
Yeah. So here's the beginning point, and here's where it goes to. The very first thing you do when you're learning a form in Grandmaster Yi Southern Praying Mantis is you learn to connect the hips and the shoulders. That's the first thing, okay, in any form. And then from there, it goes to the elbows, right, and the knees. And from there, it goes to the wrist and the ankles. So when I refer to systems being broken, it's when those things aren't working in conjunction with each other, right? Or yeah, something breaks its plane or leaves the space that it's supposed to be sitting in, right? Then that kung fu, whoever's kung fu that would be referred to by our system as broken.
And is
And
that
that's because of the energy that's in the connectivity. Once you feel the energy, then you understand what broken means.
okay? And is this a relationship with the Yum Yang? Does this have any connection to that?
To the what?
It's the Yum Yang.
Yep, completely.
Yeah.
Yep, and the fact that Southern Praying Mantis is very cable oriented and very much wind and unwind, right? So when we say like once you do a first punch, right, you don't have to think where the next punch is coming from because the body will give it to you. Well, how does the body give it to you? Well, once you've wound a certain way, all you have to do is release, right? And in that release, it gives you the next technique. Well, that release giving you the next technique gives you the next technique, right? So that's how we stick to people when we say they don't get their body back. That's why they don't get their body back because every once we touch you, um, we never don't have control,
Right.
right? But we never don't have control because we're following those principles. If you don't have those principles and if the energy isn't wound, you'll be trying to physically move back and forth and you'll never get it. And it won't have the power.
I think we just so you know, I think we have about 10 minutes left on this recording. Just to give you a heads up, it just gave me a little ding.
Okay.
A
Right.
little.
And then I'll have to run and we'll record again, but yeah, go ahead. What would you like to know next in relation to that? I know you got a list there.
Man, I have a list, and everything I'm asking you is like bringing up more.
Well, everything leads to something else. So just throw away your script.
No, no worries, no worries. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go back to my notes so I can stay on task here. Um, okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the Cheshire Bridge School specifically?
Um, yeah, the Cheshire Bridge School was the foundation really for everything. And the Cheshire Bridge School, hold on just one second. I have to send a response.
Sure.
Um, well, the Cheshire Bridge School is where a lot of our original, like um, uh, Peter Goldburn came from. It's where I started. It's where there's a lot of history in the Cheshire Bridge School, and the Cheshire Bridge School may still exist if something didn't happen. So I said I was going to kind of blow up your script a little bit. I'm going to do it right now.
Sure.
So what happened when Sifu Yi came to Atlanta to teach? The Tong came to him. Okay, the Hip Sing Tong, right? So Chinese Culture Society, we'll call them, all right? Although we know they're more than that. So they came and said, we're going to give you $40,000 a year to teach Kung Fu in Atlanta, right? And when there's going to be a Tong meeting up in Minneapolis in the fall. And so you'll go to that, and then you and Jin Fu and Mark can, work everything out. Okay. Because you had basically two guys teaching Southern Praying Mantis. So what they said, but there's a caveat. You can't teach anyone but the Chinese.
Mm,
Sifu said, no, you see, the thing is, I worked out with my teacher. The only way I would teach is if I could teach everybody, no lo fan, no hot, no. They're like, no lo fan, no haki doi. You can't teach anybody but Chinese. He goes, well, I guess that's not going to work then. So they took away the money and the meeting got canceled. Well, when that meeting got canceled, a few months later, an article about Sifu Yi appeared on Inside Kung Fu, and I was in the pictures with him, right? Well, the school in Minneapolis got a hold of those. I
oh,
got a call, and they said, you're blacklisted. You can't use Jin Fu Mark's name. You didn't ever train with us. We don't know you, all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, I did train with him and you do know me. So, yeah, but if you don't want me to teach any of his stuff anymore, um, that's fine. But why is that? And they said, well, because this article came out. And I said, if the Tong had financed Sifu Yi, he would have gone to the meeting. He would have talked to Jin Fu Mark. It would have been fine. And this article would have come out and you would have been fully aware of it. They're like, yeah, but that didn't happen. So, um, so that's why, so in the end, I couldn't teach Jin Fu Mark stuff anymore. And Sifu, I came back in the room and Sifu said, well, what was that? I said, I just got blacklisted. So he goes, well, that's okay, because you're going to enter my gate anyway. So I thought, okay, I guess, you know, I didn't know what enter the gate was, but I thought, okay, sounds good to me. So, because he had asked me before I entered the gate if Jin Fun Mark had given me anything to carry with me forever, right? Keep this thing on you forever, right? And I said no. He says, okay, then you can enter my gate. So, so you start to learn what it is, what this culture and being part of Kung Fu is by all these little idiosyncrasies, right? So that was a part of the Cheshire Bridge School, but yeah, the Cheshire Bridge was a great school. It also had a store attached to it. Unfortunately, it did require financing from the Tong that got pulled, and so the school ended up closing because it was just too expensive to run. And then Sifu ended up out in Clarkston running a school out in a strip mall. So before he ended up going to Houston.
got it. Okay. Can we talk about what you had just mentioned? I was listening to what you said and I kind of lost my train of thought. But you had just made a point about uh, oh, enter the gate. So can we talk
Yep.
about what enter the gate is, what that means, the importance of that?
Yep. Enter the gate is one of the highest honors that a master can bestow on a student. One of the beauties of the enter the gate process is there is no application, right? And there really technically isn't a test, right? The fact that you've trained and evolved over time is kind of your test. There's no standard, here's the enter the gate test, right? So I've devised because I'm getting ready to enter Sifu Robin into the gate. She will have to go through, you have to prove I know level one, level two, level three, I know all this knowledge, right? But generally before one enters the gate. But the important thing is a person can be invited to enter the gate at any point that the master decides they wish to bring them in, and it's entirely by invitation, right? And there's, like I say, there's no application. And one of the other things that's really really important about Kung Fu is if you want something, you don't ask for it, right? Because especially in anything that has to do with the spiritual plane, right? You don't go to a master and go, "Can I learn this?" It's like that doesn't even exist, although it does. So no, you can't learn that, right? First, because you mentioned it, which you can't do, right? You have to wait for me to come to you and offer to teach it to you, right? Or offer to explain what like Sung Gung means. Sung Gung is spiritual Kung Fu. I have to explain it to you because there is no practice to get there. It's it's just it's the qualities of it's the spiritual qualities of the student, and whether or not the student has maintained the chain from his master to the past masters by way of his or her character. That's why it's like that song, "Never Break the Chain." If you ever break the chain by acting out of character, it's irreparable, right? So the character of a Sifu in our system has to be unquestioned, right? We never do anything that would harm the system, bring insult to the system or the teacher, or do anything that would, in terms of a person's character, um, bring you know bring anything dark onto the system. That would probably mean your exit, whoever's exit that was, right? Because you have to, in representing the system, you have to represent the qualities of Kung Fu, of a Kung Fu person, of really say what are the qualities of a Buddhist, what are the qualities of a Taoist, what are the qualities of Kung Fu. The qualities of Kung Fu are all the qualities of a Buddhist and a Taoist,
Definitely.
right? They're interwoven, right? And it's just like there are, so if you're going to go into Kung Fu, I'd have to say, if you're going to study this system, be prepared to live in the light, right? Because it's mandatory to come into our system. You got to live in the light.
Makes sense. We have about 1 minute left. So I've been
Okay.
watching the clock to make sure we're like, I don't catch like it cuts off on you in the middle of a sentence or something. So I was trying to,
Okay. I'll keep it short.
you did it perfect. Can you end us with any just final words of wisdom before we part and get ready for part two?
Yeah, I would say that whoever views this, Gabriel, should view it as like you set it up, an introduction to the history of the system, but only from Sifuyi's point on, not backwards, right? We'll get to that in time. Um, and a chance for us to actually say that the system of CKFA, which Sifu develops, embodies Kwangsai Juklum Ji Tonglong Pai and Ting Sing Qigong for the Qigong, and that it's an opportunity for someone to enter into um, a world where the Qigong that you're going to learn is very, very unique and more powerful than anything that you've ever trained.
Well, thank you, Sifu.